What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm gonna give you a little bit of information about Dune Part 2, who made it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'll go into the things I did and did not like about the movie, the pros and cons. And finally, I'll let you know who I think the movie's for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out in theaters and on streaming, make sure you subscribe. All right, first things first, let's start with a quick premise off of IMDb. In Dune Part 2, Paul Atreides unites with Chani and the Fremen while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Now, of course, Dune is an action, adventure, sci-fi, some say the godfather of the action, adventure, sci-fi genre. It's based on the series of books written by Frank Herbert, which, to be fair, I have not read any of the books, so I want you to know that going into this. I know it sounds crazy, but I haven't wanted to ruin anything from the movies, so let me know if I can read any of the books at this point. Of course, without spoiling anything that's going to come out in any of the future films. Now, Frank Herbert wrote the books that the movie is based on, but the screenplay for the movie itself is written by John Spates, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He also wrote on Prometheus, Doctor Strange, Passengers, and of course the first Dune movie that Denis Villeneuve directed. Of course, Denis Villeneuve has a writing credit and, of course, is directing this movie as well. If you're not familiar with his work, you're definitely missing out. Some other Denis Villeneuve classics are Prisoners, Enemy, Blade Runner 2049, or Arrival as well, and of course the first Dune. He definitely likes his sci-fi, which I dig. Dune Part 2 is set to be in theaters on March 1st, so I got to see a little bit early here. And it's rated PG-13 for, of course, some violence, some suggestive material, and a bit of language here and there. The movie comes in at about 2 hours and 45 minutes, so make sure you bring a snack and use the bathroom before. And of course it has an insanely star-studded cast with Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya being in the main roles. You also have Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Dave Bautista, Christopher Walken, Javier Bardem, just a bunch of actors and actresses that you're definitely gonna recognize. So okay, before we get into my pros and cons, let me tell you what my expectations were going into the movie so that way you kind of know where I'm coming from. Now again, I have not read any of the Dune books at this point. I did really enjoy the first movie. It was actually one of my favorite movies of the year it came out, which I think was 2021. And I own it on 4K Blu-ray. I've watched it a bunch of times since then. I'm also really interested and kind of fascinated by how impactful the book series has been on sci-fi as a genre in general. And although I do know that there is a lot to cover in these movies, I was overall definitely really looking forward to this one, while still understanding that to cover even half the stuff that's in the book is a Herculean task. Also, I'm a big fan of Denis Villeneuve and Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya and a lot of the other people in the movie. Rebecca Ferguson, I think, is a phenomenal actress. So yeah, I was absolutely looking forward to this. It's right up my alley, even though I haven't read any of the books. So all right, let's start with the pros, the things that I absolutely loved about this movie. Right off the rip, the first thing I noticed as soon as the movie started was the sound design. Now, I saw it in a Dolby cinema, so of course the sound is going to be insane. And watching it in that theater, it was mind-blowing. Some of the effects that they use, the sound effects specifically, the way that they blended in the music. I think Hans Zimmer is the composer on this movie, and my dude is gonna get all the awards. He's a legend for a reason. But yeah, I know you expect a movie like this to look really cool, but it sounds, I think, even better. Now, more along the way that the movie looked, I did really dig a lot of the tech and weaponry and the set design that they had. Of course, it's like super sci-fi, so everything's gonna be a little outlandish, but it feels more grounded in reality, whether it's the ships that they use or the outfits that they have to wear to survive on the planet or any of the weaponry that they use in general. It all looks really cool and makes sense. You can also really tell that they spared no expense in making this movie. I don't know exactly what the budget is, but I imagine it was really, really high. I also think the locations were really cool. You know, most of the movie takes place on a desert planet, so it's gonna be mostly brown and just covered in sand. But then they go to some other places that have different themes, different color themes, particularly when I think you're on the Harkonnen. Is it Harkonnen? Harkonnen? How do you pronounce it? But either way, when you're on their planet, it's all black and white. And I have to imagine that's how these places must have been described in the books. They just look so stark and so interesting and unique and maybe not realistic, right? But for the world that they're building, it all works. Speaking to the story though, I love the way that they weave in this kind of religious propaganda in the storyline and the history with the Bene Gesserit setting these stories into place on this planet hundreds of years ago, and how you have Timothée Chalamet's character, who is supposed to be this messianic character who he himself doesn't even believe the prophecies because he knows where they come from, and yet somehow still falls in line with the things that the prophecy foretold. I think it's a really just cool exploration into I mean, religion and politics and how they tie together, and also how certain cultures have controlled their people with prophecies and religions and things like that. It's some heavy stuff. I also think the acting across the board is phenomenal. You know, Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, they're kind of leaning into their character types and things that we've seen them do before, but still they have so many scenes that are so powerful emotionally and really connect with you as the viewer. Then you have all the side characters, you know, like Rebecca Ferguson, who plays the mother of Paul Atreides, who herself is a Bene Gesserit. She is so good. She's such a good actress, and I've been seeing her in more stuff recently, and every single time she blows me away. I remember watching an interview where she said that she didn't get accepted into any kind of acting schools when she was applying to different schools like Juilliard and whatnot. And it just blows my mind, because if she doesn't have real formal training in that way, that kind of just goes to show how much that is not needed, because she is a phenomenal actress. I also really liked Javier Bardem in the movie. He plays one of the Fremen, who is kind of like a religious zealot. Like, he really believes in the prophecies, and his character is just really wholesome. He is funny from time to time, but he also just so wholeheartedly believes that he'll do anything to make sure that Paul Atreides accomplishes what he needs to. And it's just good to have characters like that who aren't completely jaded with everything that's going on. There are also some other characters in the movie that I really love, but I don't want to talk about them too much because I don't want to spoil how much they are involved in the story. But honestly, across the board, everyone is fantastic. And all the people that you've seen in the trailers, when you see them in the movie, it's, I mean, taken up to another level. A couple more pros that I want to touch on is, one is that, of course, the books we know are so dense. There's so much information. There's so much story. There's decades, if not centuries, of history. And it would be impossible to fit all of that into a 2.5 hour, 2 hour and 45-minute long movie. And I think that Denis Villeneuve did about as good as you can hope for in that kind of situation. They really do a phenomenal job of cramming in so much history, so much timeline, so much development into this one movie. Now, do I think they were completely without fault when it comes to trying to squeeze all this information into one movie? No, but we'll get more into that with the cons. But before we get into the cons, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by you. That's right, I'm just a small independent channel here without any big corporate sponsors or anything like that. So just by watching the video, you're really helping me out. If you want to be super dope and show your support in the easiest possible way, do me a solid and like the video, and maybe leave a comment. Let me know, have you read any of the Dune books at all? And if so, how are you feeling about the way that they're adapting them to these movies? You can also now join as a channel member if you want to help support me financially, or just subscribe for free if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out. So either way, whatever you do, I appreciate it. All right, on to the cons. And before we get into them, I do have some cons, so do not attack me in the comments. If you disagree, that's totally cool. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I definitely think a movie like this is gonna have people with some really opposing opinions. Okay, so the first big con is something that I've touched on already, and that is because there's so much information to go over in this movie, they kind of skim over a lot of it. And I'll be honest, for me, it was a little jarring moving through time as quickly as they did and just like barely touching on things. It wasn't enough to ruin the movie by any means. And in fact, I don't think it bothered most people, but it absolutely was something that I noticed. And if I noticed it, you might too. So because of that, because they had to kind of rush through everything, a lot of the character development felt rushed. So you have characters who have a romantic relationship that develops throughout the movie, and it felt like in one scene there was nothing happening between them, and then in the very next scene they're all lovey-dovey without any real development as to how that happened. Or when it comes to even the more technical aspects of the way that the battles and the war develop, the characters just kind of move from one location to another, and you really don't know how much time has passed, except for there is something that kind of tells you the overall length of the movie. And I don't want to spoil what that is, but there is something that takes a very specific amount of time and it hasn't happened by the end of the movie. So you know that it all must have taken place within a certain number of months. But if not for that, it would feel like this would have all taken years to occur. So yeah, the time was a little funky. Also, another issue with having so much to pull from, there are so many characters in this movie and in this story, and they're all fantastic, but a lot of them didn't get nearly as much development as I would have liked to see. So much so that some of the characters that are pretty important to the story are just barely touched on, and they kind of become just surface level, almost character tropes. And I get it. They couldn't make this movie 5 hours long. We can't get into every single character and all of their motivation. But I'm just letting you know that's something I did notice. And maybe I'll be better served by going and reading the book now that I've seen the kind of gist of the story. If I really want to like drill down into the specifics of what occurred, maybe that's what the book is for. So this isn't a big deal per se. I'm just nitpicking here and trying to find all the things that maybe didn't work for me. Another thing is that so much of this movie involves kind of fortune telling. You know, the Bene Gesserit have set up these prophecies hundreds of years ago. I think it's hundreds of years ago. And so they kind of already know what's going to happen. And because of that, we kind of already know a lot of what's going to happen. And when you have that as a story element in any story, it removes some of the tension and some of the uncertainty. And that's just this kind of a side effect of having a prophecy or a fortune teller or whatever in a movie. But that's less of an issue with how the movie is made or anything like that, and I guess just more of an issue with the general concept of the story. Last up, and I'm gonna include this in my cons, even though I don't think it's really a con, but it is what it is. And the fact of the matter is, Dune is so pivotal in the entire sci-fi genre. There are so many movies that we've seen in the past forever, since movies started being made, that derive a lot from Dune. Whether it's Star Wars, of course, or The Matrix, or even The Fifth Element and movies like that. So much is derived from Dune that when you watch this movie now, you're seeing all these other things that you're already familiar with, and it kind of lessens the impact of them. And I know, Dune did it first, but the fact of the matter is, most of us are going into this having already seen all of these other sci-fi movies that are derivative of Dune. And so when you see those stories kind of repeated here, it feels formulaic and it feels familiar. So that might be a con for some people. Again, for me, I'm able to kind of put my head in a place of, this is the godfather of those movies, so I am not gonna let that bother me, but it might bother some people. So all right, those are all my pros, all my cons, everything I did and did not like about the movie. Who do I think Dune Part 2 is for? Well, okay, despite my little nitpicks here and there, I absolutely love this movie. And if you're a big fan of sci-fi, if you read the original books, and if you're looking for a new and interesting and updated adaptation of them, then I think you're absolutely gonna love this. Now, of course, I know some people just aren't into sci-fi and space sci-fi and stuff like that. So if that's you, obviously this movie's not for you. But for me, it is a movie that I absolutely recommend to the highest degree possible. This is something that you have to see in theaters in the best possible screen you have, whether that's Dolby Vision or IMAX or whatever you have available to you. Don't go to the cheap dollar theater. Go to the best possible screen you can see and watch this movie. And of course, I'm gonna be buying it on 4K Blu-ray as soon as it comes out. You know what though? I do have one question that I forgot to mention earlier. So in the movie, they ride these sandworms. How do they get off of those things? Do they just dive off the side while they're riding? I don't know. If you know, let me know. But either way, if Dune Part 2 sounds cool to you, definitely check it out in theaters March 1st. And if you've already seen it, let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, if you just want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies and shows that are coming out in theaters and on streaming, make sure you subscribe. All right, my dude. I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.